Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, sorry to interrupt your widely vivid kind of a good discussion, but I may have some new perspectives to add. Antti, please sit down. We are continuing. I want to say that, sorry to interrupt you, but as I said, I promised some new perspectives, quite different of those from Professor Chang. Professor Chang nicely painted us kind of the bigger picture, the macro perspective, and pointed out some important kind of observations of the role of government in general, and I particularly like his last comment about the healthy skepticism, because not everything changes, and then again, I mean, change is the only constant that we know. So we have to always kind of think carefully. I mean, our context, we have to understand our context, we have to understand what are really kind of the fundamental changes and drivers and whatnot. But then again, I mean, we do believe, and I strongly believe, that the speed of change and the complexity around is kind of dramatically increasing, and that calls for some new behaviors and changes. So what I'm really next, we are really shifting our attention now from the macro to micro perspective. And we are looking at really the behaviors at the kind of organizational level in leadership that are required to cope with change, which is a constant, as we just learned. And I'm now talking here more as a researcher and corporate executive, which used to be my career prior Sitra. So the findings that I'm sharing you are basing very much on my experiences as an executive at the corporate, and also then as a researcher, looking at other companies as well, analyzing other companies. So I'm not claiming that the leadership practices and the mechanisms that I'm next sharing with you would all be applicable to public sector and government in general. But based on my little over a year experience in the public sector now in Sitra, I believe strongly that a lot what I'm sharing with you now is applicable, in fact, also, and should be applied in the public sector. But this is also then a kind of up to you to decide and see what is applicable in the small group work right after this presentation. But let me start by just defining how I see strategic agility, how we define it with Professor Yves Doss, with whom we co-authored the book on this. So strategic agility, the continuous renewal capability of an organization, consists of three vectors. One is strategic sensitivity, your organization's capability to see and frame opportunities and threats in a fresh way as they emerge, so that you are not a prisoner of your old past lenses. Secondly, then, you need resource fluidity, the capability for swift resource redeployment, as was also pointed out by Professor Chang, which really, as we define, it's the organization's capability for fast and efficient resource redeployment and mobilization. And then finally, probably last but not least, certainly least importantly, leadership unity, which is really an organization's capability to make collective commitments and decisions. So this is as we define strategic agility. I will come back to that in many times still, but this is the concept. Why is it so? Why do you need it today so much, and why is it so hard to kind of sustain and achieve in general? First of all, why would we need it is really the two reasons that I already gave a minute ago. The speed of change, which is increasing, as well as the nature of change, which is becoming more complex and systemic in nature. So you cannot really address it in the silo way that many governments and companies address change. You would be fine, I guess, with just kind of continuous improvement as your strategy or operational excellence, doing what you have always done a little bit more and better and faster, if your kind of environment was slowly changing and simple and linear in nature. And if you only had a complex systemic nature, you would be fine with, let's say, conventional planning paradigm, where you sequentially first plan and then you implement. But unfortunately today, we don't really know, we don't understand the future. It's very difficult to anticipate what's happening. The complexities are so big, so you just cannot kind of rely on just first planning and then implementing. The paradigm just doesn't work. It worked still when Shell was trying to control the future in the 70s, when it created a lot of sophisticated strategic planning and scenario methodologies, but it's not anymore kind of today's media. And you would say that you would be fine if the world was just fast changing, but all of the kind of opportunities were standalone, separate opportunities. You would be fine with just kind of entrepreneurship. Like Gary Hamel, one of the strategy gurus, says nicely that you should be kind of bringing Silicon Valley inside your company or organization. It's kind of nicely said and put, but in fact it only captures half of the truth. Because the other half of the truth is that most of the opportunities are not isolated, standalone opportunities, but they are, because of the complexity and systemic nature of environment, they are interdependent. And you need to manage them as a whole. So what that leads into in practice is that if you have an environment around you, whatever your institution is, which can be characterized by speed of change, fast change and complexity, then you need kind of a, you could say, strategic agility. I could probably kind of just use here a flip chart just to kind of emphasize that when we talk about strategic agility, we don't just put the word strategy in front of the word agility to make it sound more important, as most consultants do. But we do it because if you look at this, if you have agility here and you have strategic here, it's an oxymoron, in fact, as a word, this thing, or paradox. Because you would really, if you would be really strategic, you wouldn't have to be agile, right? And again, if you are not at all strategic, you better be very, very agile. But then again, in today's world, which is characterized by complexity and fast change, you just have to get here and try to somehow manage and lead in this very slippery slope, which is in economic terms. I know I've been talking a lot with economists. This is almost it's kind of impossible. It's a contradiction in terms. But in real life, in leadership, you have to cope with this situation. So you have to create an organization which is capable of being at the same time kind of strategic, having a direction, and swift in making changes as you go. Not the old way that you first plan and then you start doing. But the operational performance pressures in most organizations, and also I would say the lack of skills and lack of good management, you fall down into this kind of continuous improvement, doing what you have always been doing a little bit more faster and running, which is really the efficiency trap. You lose your strategic agility. Now, I mean, I'm quickly going through just, so that you understand why sustaining strategic agility is so enormously difficult. Is that it's very natural kind of to lose it, and in a way your success turns into a trap. And let me just go through. There are kind of we identified in our research kind of some what we call toxic side effects that deteriorate your strategic sensitivity, resource fluidity, and leadership unity. And let me next, in 3 slides, show you in a little bit more detail what is the process of losing your strategic sensitivity, losing your resource fluidity, and losing your leadership unity. I'm sharing this with you because you have to understand that this is a very natural process. It happens to all institutions and organizations. And only by understanding the mechanisms, you can fight against them and find the cures. And in the latter part of my presentation, I'm then sharing with you what are the cures, the antidotes, what you have to kind of adapt as an organization, be a government or then a public institution, to fight back this deterioration process, what I'm talking about here. But let's take first the kind of the the first kind of the deterioration of strategic sensitivity. No, sorry, this is now they went in wrong order, these slides. Wait a minute, where is? Yeah, here. This is the first one. So how do you lose your strategic sensitivity? It's kind of the process is devious in the sense that the very same qualities that makes you great first. This is exactly the thinking behind why success always turns to a failure. Because the very same qualities that make you first kind of succeed for a while turn against you. So when you kind of have a clear vision for the future of your core kind of a mission, whatever it is, activity, business, you start considering everything outside the core as non-relevant. You fall a victim to a tunnel vision. If you think of the kind of mobile communication industry in the early 2000s, everybody was just talking about 3G as some kind of miracle solution to everything. Operators paid billions of dollars for licenses for almost like from air. I mean, they licenses for nothing because they were all prisoners of big-time prisoners of a tunnel vision. So they believed in one truth, which is a big mistake. When you then try kind of which is also very natural, is that organizations kind of strive for they put sustained effort for maximally leveraging their core activity. This leads to this kind of optical bias in the ways that you start framing everything in the light of your core mission, and which then becomes you kind of the tyranny of the core activity starts kind of ruling you. You just kind of you are only interested, and you look at the future opportunities from the point of view of your core activity. How does this add value to what I'm already doing? Or if it doesn't, then it's not kind of needed. So you're not giving opportunities for new ideas, technologies, business models, operating models, ways of working at all, because you're always kind of looking at kind of killing them too early in a way. When you put tight focus on continuous improvement, it automatically leads to very short-term internal orientation and finally into this kind of strategic myopia. And when you strive for leadership positioning everything you do, it leads automatically to reluctance to open collaboration and experimentation. You become a victim of dominance mindset. You kind of you want to kind of you defend your position. I always remember when Nokia achieved its #1 position in the world. I mean, March '98. Until that, it had been a challenger. The vision of Nokia had always been beat Motorola. It changed overnight when we finally reached the goal. We became the incumbent defending our position. It completely changed the mindset of people overnight. And from that of taking risks to that of avoiding risks. From strategic sensitivity, it's detrimental. And when you kind of always kind of emphasize action orientation and self-confidence, that leads over time to some kind of action hero syndrome, where you don't really have time and interest for evaluating different alternatives, and it over time builds into intellectual laziness. Now let me just, I'm this way in wrong order, but let me just take this one next. Which is then when you have kind of again, I mean, let's see if you have here we have the qualities again, which sound and look good, don't they? I mean, if you look at the government today, it's organized into different strong units with sufficient autonomy. Growing is not necessarily a relevant word here in terms of government, but they are autonomous units. But this leads then to, again, a lot of problems, because it leads to core managers on different levels to sit on their resources, and resources are then imprisoned in different organizational silos. When you are striving for highly efficient systems and processes, it leads to increasingly differentiated and specialized activity systems, which then become rigid. So you become a kind of prisoner of very rigid structures. You don't even dare to change a structure because you are afraid that the information systems running it do not kind of work anymore, and the operation collapses, and you don't dare to make a change. When you are striving for different type of collaborative relationship with key partners, we are human beings. We learn to know the people, we start to like the people we deal with, we kind of, in a way, lose our own will and strategic freedom to act. We become kind of prisoners of the ties around us, the partners kind of become ties that bind our hands. I have numerous examples from different companies becoming and falling victim to these ties, but don't have. In the interest of time, let's not spend too much time on that now. And then, of course, learning by doing. As in most organizations, people grow from within their own organizational silos and functions. In good times, it leads to kind of forgiven and hidden misbehavior and shortcomings in competencies, and only in tough times, those become visible, and you find out that you don't really have the general management capabilities or competencies that you need. And finally, then also something which also kind of starts from something good. People are calling for clear charters for all organizational units, etc. But what that also kind of over time then leads to when you have clear charters for all organizational units, it automatically leads to declining intensity of dialogue and decreasing need for collective commitments, which leads to management growing apart, management divergence. Most organizations are not anymore, their top teams are not teams, but they are kind of a collection of highly kind of autonomous, power-driven individuals that gather together on a monthly basis to fight for resources. That's no team. It cannot they can make decisions, but they are consensus decisions without full-hearted commitment. And then management wonders, why doesn't execution work? Of course it doesn't work because nobody is full-heartedly committed. And when you have kind of preference for fast decision making, or then when you have strong leaders with proven track record, it also leads easily to inflated egos who make overly bold commitments or are become risk averse, and different kind of implicit pecking orders, again leading to heady charm of fame and power. And these people with high egos are not very good listeners and team workers in general. They cannot make collective commitments. It's my way or no way. And when you have a lot of people in management of this quality, then nothing happens, of course. Preference for fast decision making leads to expert management, and you could also say that when you have a lot of people that has been around for a long time, particularly if they have been doing well with their jobs, they fall victims to this, what we call tired hero syndrome, which is very human and natural when your future opportunities start looking less thrilling than your past experiences. You fall victim to kind of emotional apathy. And all organizations, all managers, executives should know, and you know it, that if any one single person in the management group who suffers from emotional apathy looks of the past only and thinks about the past is kind of is detrimental to the kind of the health of the whole organization, because people understand, they see it, and the whole organization typically kind of is infected then, and it starts suffering from emotional apathy as a whole. So sorry about this. I mean, but what I'm just kind of summarizing is the first part of my presentation is to say that most organizations die not because they do the wrong things. In fact, you learn from the wrong things, but because they keep doing what used to be the right things for too long. And I just kind of explain you the process for this happening. This is very human. It happens even to the best executives in the best companies. It happened to Nokia in the early 2000s. It happened to IBM, who almost died to these diseases. It happened to digital equipment company in the early 90s, who in fact did go bankrupt. And in fact, interesting enough, for instance, digital equipment company made its historical ever best financial results just 1 year before it collapsed. Had it diagnosed its real health in its leadership a little bit earlier, it would have been a warning signal. They could have changed. But because they were just looking at the financial reports, it looks good. And your neighbors are saying that it looks good, you are good. You start believing what is not really kind of the real, I mean, what's not really the real reality, then this happens. Oh no, how do I get back now? Sorry about this. I mean, the slides I should have checked. I mean, they were in the wrong order. So I'm just kind of I summarized you how even the best organizations fall victims to these toxic side effects that deteriorate your strategic sensitivity, capability to see what's happening really around you, your resource fluidity, capability of, as they say in Army, poor resources for a breakthrough, because the resources are present in different organizational silos. And finally, even if the organization saw the opportunity or threat, and even if it was able to move resources, it cannot make decisions and commitments because the top management is a collection of people who play their own political games. And I'm not now referring to party politics, I'm referring to organizational politics, which is, I'm sure also, I mean, at least I have seen it in the private sector. I believe it might also appear in the public sector. Don't know, but you can discuss about that. Now, sorry about this. So, just to summarize also in a little bit different way, all organizations and companies particularly, but I would also claim that organizations in general have what they do, there's a life cycle for that, what they do and how they do it. And typically, as I said, organizations, they are agile in the beginning. In the first place, I mean, they would not have ever got into what they are doing well unless they had demonstrated some strategic agility. But once they then get used to what they are doing, they start kind of just improving what they have always been doing, and then they fall victims to these kind of toxic side effects that I just kind of described, and they become strategically very rigid, even paralyzed, just when the paradigm changes and they are not able to respond then. And this is really the kind of problem, because even in the public sector, I would claim, and certainly in industries, these S-curves kind of come and go faster and faster. And there are also disruptive elements in the public sector. I mean, if you look at healthcare in general or whatever, I mean, it's fundamentally transforming because of digital capability, digital convergence, and other kind of mega trends. And if we are not responding, then it's going to be bad for the country. So let's look at the kind of some of the capabilities, then what you can do, because this is not inevitable. Good leadership can address these challenges. And let me just share with you some of the kind of the findings for what you can do. First, the strategic sensitivity. The mechanisms that we found in our research behind strategic sensitivity are these here. I mean, you have 3 meta capabilities: open strategy process, heightened strategic alertness, and high quality internal dialogue. In open strategy process, the key, behind the open strategy process, you really have to build 2 types of kind of, I would say, managerial practices. First of all, your organization need to learn to co-strategize with multiple stakeholders. You have to open up the organization for a dialogue between the external world. Cisco, which is one of the leading kind of fastest changing companies in the world, they have a concept in use, what they called the architecture for staying connected with the world. In that architecture, they have defined who people in what levels in the organization have a regular dialogue with what different external stakeholders. They also have a rule in the company that every senior manager, regardless of the function or position, has to meet twice a month an external stakeholder. Write a report to in their internet, what did I learn from this external world? So they kind of force the organization to breathe externally, to learn from the outside. Experimentation is very important as well, because you have to you don't, in today's world, and as human beings, we don't typically learn by just from intellectual conversations. We need to do something. We have to see in order to change, and we have to kind of experience. We don't change our mental models otherwise. And experimentation is hence very important. They can be of any sort as long as you do something, not just think and plan. Another meta capability that we identified is heightened strategic alertness, which, and again, there are two kind of main practices behind that. The best companies, at least, they have a very conscious policy to provide their people stretched, almost like unrealistic and contradictory goals. Stretched, contradictory goals is good for you if you want to build a living organization, living organism. If you have kind of realistic, well-aligned goals, you create or build up an engine or motor or machine which does what it has always been doing a little bit better, probably, but it's not renewing itself. So we coined a term in our book which we said unstable by design organizations. So best companies, at least, they build organizations that are unstable by design. So they have multiple organizational dimensions in matrix, and between each of these dimensions there is a tension, maybe even a contradiction in goals, because some organizational units can have a kind of a role of differentiating and making a difference in the marketplace. For instance, I mean, if you have typically companies are organized in different divisions who have a product or whatever service to be sold, but nowadays also the organizations have different matrix, horizontal units, which then run some resources for all the units. And of course, the goal setting for the horizontal units is to maximize the utilization of a certain resource, which is a scarce resource or whatever. And then the goal of the vertical units is to maximize the market impact. And there is a kind of inbuilt conflict here of interest. And that's good. It's designed there because that leads to discussion. You have to resolve the conflict. You have to find a new optimum. And that's very important. So stretched and contradictory goals are an important vehicle for building a strategically agile organization. What is also important is open business definition. Because if you cannot define your whatever activity it can be here, I mean, I call it business, but it can be your mission. I mean, how you define your mission. Let me just take one example from the business side, which I think illustrates this point very well. My ex-colleague from Nokia, Matti Alahuhta, who is nowadays the CEO of Kone, and in fact the chairman of the Aalto University, he was wondering last fall what to do with Kone's business definition. He found that it was kind of, people were not really very thrilled about yet building better elevators. And they had been doing that for decades. And so he was wondering what to do for that. And he, in a couple of months later, he came up with a new business definition for Kone. And it says now that Kone wants to be the greatest people flow company on earth. Now, people flow does not exclude elevators. It's building on a mega trend in the world, which is urbanization. People are moving to cities. You need to move them in vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. Kone has always been, by doing skyscraper elevators, it's optimizing people movements. So it has the competence. It builds on a mega trend, which is in the world. But the outcome of this new business definition was, first of all, the outside markets suddenly saw Kone as a very interesting company. Their stock price kind of jumped because they saw that the available market for Kone was suddenly much, much bigger. But most importantly, internally, it created enormous energy and inspiration. And now I'm coming back to my point. Clear vision is bad management. Fuzzy vision is good management. Fuzzy vision gives you the direction, but leaves room for imagination. People start, because in what happened in Kone, people just all the people who had just been doing what they have always been doing suddenly rushed to innovate. What could this people flow mean? They came to Matti Alahuhta, and as a good leader, he said when they asked him, "What do you mean by people flow?" He said, "I don't have a slightest idea. It's your job to think about that." And that's what I'm saying. It inspires the organization. It gives direction and kind of inspires all the resources in the company to be used for the good of the kind of the building for the future. And this is what we call then just examples of how do you build heightened strategic alertness, so that your people are just not doing what they've always been doing in their own corners. High quality internal dialogue, another key quality, builds on factual and conceptual richness. Unfortunately, most management groups, in at least companies, but I would claim that also in public institutions, they are collections of high people with, as I said, high autonomy needs and power motivations, as well as they're very opinionated. Decisions are made based on who is running the biggest unit, or rather than who has the smartest argument. And then the role of management is then to make sure that there is somebody in the organization that prepares top team meetings by bringing the factual and conceptual richness for the discussion. And the best companies that we've studied have kind of separate, they have kind of they had kind of special people that are just preparing and facilitating top management group meetings by providing the facts, by providing the framework, the language, the common language for problem solving, and by being there facilitating the meeting, they force the opinionated leaders to raise the level of the quality of their dialogue. And so that you get out of this trap of just kind of opinionated decision making. And cognitive diversity, again, a very important fact. Let me just take an example here again, because I just want to say that cognitive diversity is something very, very different to demographic diversity. Demographic diversity refers to whether you have women or men or old and new, Finns, no Finns, all these things. I'm not claiming that demographic diversity would be unimportant. From human resources policies point of view, it's very important that people feel and see that there is not a glass ceiling for anybody. But there is no whatsoever scientific proof. Nobody has ever proven any correlation between demographic diversity and the quality of top team dialogue. But there is a huge amount of research proving positive correlation between cognitive diversity and the quality of top team meeting. Let me take an example here. The so-called Nokia Dream Team that was managing Nokia throughout the heydays in the 90s. Ollila, Ala-Pietilä, Alahuhta, Kallasvuo, Baldauf. Now, let's accept there was an exception in the rule. There was one woman. But otherwise, it's hard to find a more demographically homogeneous team. Same age people, same education, almost all coming from Vaasan Lyseo, one school in Finland. Distant school, I mean, in the Österbotten. Now, so demographic homogeneity, huge, but I had the kind of the pleasure and privilege to work this side by side with these people for almost 20 years, and I still don't remember any single question that these 5 people would have interpreted the same way, even after working 15 years side by side, because their brains worked so completely differently. One was a philosophist with long-term view, one was a numbers guy, one was very intuitive, etc. So the way their brains worked was different. So they had cognitive diversity, but huge kind of demographic diversity. Demographic diversity was non-existent. Now, what there is, this really is why I'm saying this is very important, because you as leaders and managers, like all of us, you like to hire people who think the same way as you. You try to comply with the diversity kind of requirements, and you pay attention to what kind of people you have around you. but then you try to kind of secure that at least if they look different, they think the same way. Whereas it should be exactly the same, or the opposite. It doesn't matter how they look. They can all look exactly the same as long as they think differently. So go deeper into what diversity really means if you want to create kind of renewal capability in your organizations. How do you then get these people to think different? I mean, when you then have people who think differently, this is really the tough ones. I mean, how do you build leadership unity? How do you build cabinet responsibility for your management? First thing is having a shared agenda and incentives. So people, if you have people with conflicting targets who think differently, you have to incentivize these people from the overall cooperation or organization goals, achieving the goals, not for subunits. Because the people should be there, every single one of them, just thinking and looking for the good of the whole, the bigger part, the whole organization. And they should be incentivized primarily from that. That leads them to make trade-offs for the good of the whole rather than sub-optimizing their own thing. And for instance, I'm just taking this example, although it might take a couple of minutes, but it's important again. I mean, from IBM, a well-known company. When Lou Gerstner took over IBM CEO-ship in June 1993, he inherited a management group of a little bit over 10 people. In fact, he did not change his organization in the next 6 months at all. He did not change any single persons in the top team in the first 6 months. What he did immediately in June 93, he changed the charter of the management group meeting. In what ways? Now, the first of all, he sat the whole day they spent on thinking what are the IBM-wide integration, horizontal integration themes. Because he had came to the conclusion that IBM's customers want solutions. They don't want point-to-point products or whatever that every single different units were doing. Like in the public sector, citizens want services. They don't want to look at the different kind of organizational silos, I mean, who are providing different type of things. But IBM's customers want solutions. Now, therefore, they spent the whole first management group meeting in defining what are the IBM-wide integration themes. In that very same theme, Gerstner said, assigned responsibilities to each of his sub-unit managers, regardless of their responsibility. He said that you, Mr. Head of this and this business, from this day on, you have IBM-wide responsibility. I underline, IBM-wide responsibility of this and this integration team. And by the way, from this day on, more than 50% of your incentives, overall incentives, comes from managing this horizontal dimension. And by the way, from this day on, when we convene together next time in July, we don't spend a minute or a second in talking about your individual vertical business. We spend 100% of the time in creating the future of IBM and you reporting on the horizontal integration teams. So what did he do? He did, in one meeting, he changed the identity of these fighting subunit managers to that of the identity of the whole. And then in the next 6 months' time, he followed after how did these people learn to live in this new collegial kind of team-like structure. And then he found out that, I mean, one by one, those people who couldn't cope with this, he changed. And then he, over time, also changed the organization. He made it in very kind of people mutually dependent on each other. So the organization, instead of kind of organize it into different organizational silos, which then break down into the new kind of organizational silos, he, in fact, created an organization which today is almost functional in nature. IBM is a 400,000 people global organization which has a functional organization at the top, practically. Nokia has a functional organization today at the top. Cisco has a functional organization at the top. Most of the best companies have a functional organization at the top. And yet they are in many businesses because they have this philosophy of providing solutions to customers, and they have also they need to, because they want to be efficient, they need to kind of leverage kind of common resources as efficiently as they can. They want to share resources for economies of scale and efficiency reasons. They have created an organization which is interdependent and integrated, tightly integrated, and not organized in silos. But this, of course, calls for a completely different type of behavior, where you have to embrace conflict and dialogue instead of consensus and debate. Most top management teams are a collection of people who play the right-hand side game here. Their decision-making evolves from a personal kind of soft disagreement to public agreement, i.e. a consensus decision and private dissent, which then leads to passive sabotage. And then management wonders, why doesn't execution work? I mean, of course it doesn't work because people are not committed, whereas the best companies have created a culture which is built on embracing conflict and dialogue, where your kind of decision-making and discussion evolves from a genuine, visible personal dissent to collective agreement and energized action. So just emphasizing, dialogue and debate are two completely different ball games, although both start with D. Debate is fighting with words, who wins, whose argument wins. Dialogue is exploring each other's assumptions. You immediately recognize it when you go to a room. I mean, you hear comments like, please let me, do you mean this? Please help me understand. Could it be this? And then the other comes in and helps you, and then you start building something together. Instead of, in a debate, waiting for a weak argument of another to hit there to win resources. It's a completely different ballgame. Institutionalized job rotation. I just cannot emphasize that enough, the importance of that. I don't know any single example where an organization would have suffered from not moving their people around. Unfortunately, people don't do it voluntarily. You have to institutionalize it, period, without exceptions. You just have to move people around. Again, an example, when Nokia achieved its number one position in March 98, getting the number one position in the world, Olli rotated his top team people. Matti Alahuhta, who was by that time, he was the head of the infrastructure business, who knew nothing about brand-driven consumer business. He was put responsible of Nokia mobile phones. And Pekka Alapetlä, who was by that time the head of the president of the biggest business, he was put in charge of this big new venture organization. And wow, in one meeting, the dialogue and the whole behavioral kind of everything changed. Because suddenly these guys who had already by that time grown pretty big egos in knowing what their business is, suddenly they became very humble, asking each other's help of getting things done. At the same time, all the pecking orders in the organization were broken down. And the dynamism in the dialogue completely, improved dramatically just by moving these people on. And just reminding you, when Alahuhta moved as the head of mobile phones, from day one, business improvements, performance improved dramatically. Because you are not at that level changing experts, you are changing leaders, rotating leaders who bring a new perspective to the old business, which always adds value. But then you need to institutionalize these behaviors, like what Cisco put, they have a rule in place, which I would advise to any organization. 10% of your people have to move in every cost center in the company every year without any exception. 10% of the people have to move, no exceptions. And that way you build dynamism and rotation there. But again, as you know, people don't move voluntarily because they are afraid that their value add will drop, and their managers will not let them go because they are afraid that they don't achieve their goals with those people. So don't fall into wishful thinking here. You just have to institutionalize it. And then CEO first among peers. It means completely new type of leadership from the top guy. He or she has to start kind of being so-called first among equals. I'm going now 2 minutes over time, but I'm doing another example because it's important that you understand. Again, I'm taking IBM as an example here, but when Sam Palmisano took over as the CEO of IBM, he abolished executive committee completely. They don't have an executive committee in IBM anymore. He replaced that with 3 teams, and they are called teams. And interesting enough, Sam Palmisano, who is the chairman and CEO of the company, he is not a chairman of any one of these 3 teams. Chief Strategy Officer is the chairman of strategy team, Chief Technology Officer is the chairman of technology team, and Chief Financial Officer is the chairman of the operations team. Palmisano plays this first among peers role, where he considers failing as a leader when he has to base his position on his positional power, because he's playing the devil's advocate game there. So he has changed the organization from that of a conventional hierarchy to that of a real meritocracy. So where the competence is the thing that matters. And of course it's tough for a leader because he or she has to know a lot of but substance and to manage there. And finally, the resource fluidity. There the key thing, very important point for the public sector. First of all, in order to really get rid of the resource imprisonment, the main thing you have to do is to dissociate business or whatever activity results that you are responsible from resource ownership. You don't need to own and sit of those resources that you need to perform your activity. You can use shared resources. And budgeting is the biggest enemy of strategic agility. If you cannot allocate resources for a year, or even worse, for years to somebody regardless of how the world will turn out to be, it's insane. The best companies are having a resource allocation mechanisms that are based on a weekly review. So they look at, like IBM and Nokia, they are looking at how resource allocation is being moved from one place to another on a weekly basis. They follow up whether their strategic assumptions are realizing or not. And if they are not realizing, you are promised, like in Nokia's case, you get 6 months ahead, you get kind of resources with one condition. That condition is that your strategy is still working. But if it's not anymore valid, then you lose the right for your resources. The resources are reallocated. So you only have the resources based on the assumption that the strategy is still valid, and you have to prove it. So you don't get any resources for any time unless you can kind of show that it works. And then values-based management I could talk much more about, but now in the interest of time, let's stop here. And then also the plug-and-play modular structures is something which I also want to emphasize. If you want to get rid, and I'm very happy to see that in the public sector this is starting to happen, but you have to get rid of organization-specific processes and IT systems. You have to have common IT platforms and processes which can be used by several organizations. This provides the transparency of data, and it also provides it's much more cost efficient, and it also it allows you to change your organization anytime. Like in Nokia, organization can be changed over the weekend without touching the business processes and IT systems, because they are not organization dependent. They have been defined for a certain type of activity, regardless of how the organization is being designed. So I'm just kind of showing that it's possible to avoid strategic paralysis. It's possible to build strategic agility in the organization with good leadership. And I'm just asking that where is Finland and public sector on this curve? I would claim that we are pretty close to that kind of we are at the end of the operational excellence thing, and we are starting to fall victims to strategic rigidity in the face of major kind of strategic challenges in aging population, etc. Are we smart enough to proactively move, or do we have to wait for another crisis, as we had in the late 80s, early 90s? And you can, I'm not suggesting that you do this, but there's an interesting test that you can do in your organization. Here you have those toxic side effects that I just kind of listed in the beginning of my presentation. Then you have the consequences there, and then you can ask yourself whether this sickness is relevant for me or not. And I would claim and guess that many of them are real for you. But as I was just sharing with you, there are ways you can address these problems. Thank you for your attention.